A coalition of legal and immigration groups, including the American Civil Liberties Union, of which I'm a board member here in New Mexico, has filed suit on behalf of 10 women and children who are or were detained at an immigration center in Artesia. The suit alleges detainees are being denied adequate access to attorneys and have not had opportunities to present claims for asylum, most importantly. And now comes a new twist. KUNM Radio reports that the facility may not be in compliance with state child welfare laws. Immigrant detention centers that hold minors are required to either move them into state-licensed child care facilities within 72 hours of arrest, which this sort of is, or have the state-licensed detention center itself as a child care center. Doesn't happen. It appears that New Mexico has not licensed the center, and federal officials didn't answer questions about the licensing issue. Meanwhile, detainees have told voluntary lawyers their children are suffering from inadequate medication and nutrition. Here to weigh in on this and other news of the week is attorney Sophie Martin. Also back at the table is the regular Tom Garrity of the Garrity Group. Joining us once again from the Associated Press is Russell Contreras, and we welcome back Inez Russell Gomez of the Santa Fe New Mexican. Sophie, now, interesting, we had mused at this table a few weeks ago that a suit was likely.
It's coming, yes.
Yep, absolutely. But what in fact would this suit uncork? What would happen if this was to be successful?
Well, I think there are a number of things that could happen, but just to give you a sense of what's happening in California in a not entirely different suit, California courts have said that the federal government has to bring back people who it deported in order to give them an opportunity to fully pursue their claims. Both there and here, we're seeing the complaints really center around the procedural problems, people not getting their procedural opportunities, procedural rights, and the claim alleges really serious problems with how the detention center manages the relationship between detainees and their attorneys. Now, that access to an attorney is a huge part of the American legal system. Our judges take it very seriously. And so I think here in New Mexico, we also have this possibility, and it's asked for in the claim, also the possibility that people would be allowed to come back and fully pursue their rights in our courts.
I'm glad you brought that last bit back, Inez, because the suit, again, is for 10 folks who have left already, and that's a key distinction there. But we're hearing reports of things happening at this facility that are not terribly comfortable for a lot of folks that are in the business of child welfare. I'm wondering if this is the leverage point for folks to be able to get in there, because so far no one's even able to get into the facility. Reporters such as yourselves can't even get in there at this point.
No, that's true. They said they're going to bring people back, I think next month perhaps, but that's really not enough, because you basically have mothers and children being warehoused, and unless someone can report and say this is what's happening, it becomes a he said, she said, and you don't know if those people are getting the rights to which they're entitled.
Sure. It seems pretty clear from the reporting that what Sophie mentioned as well was limited time with clients, so to speak. I'll use finger quotes here. But the other big problem was the children, back to the children thinking, you can't have a quiet one-on-one conversation with a very distressed mother because the kids are underfoot, literally. It just seems like an impossible situation for everybody.
Yeah, there were reports of lawyers bringing crayons secretly in their bags so the kids would have something to play with while they talked to the parents.
Right.
And under the act that this applies to these children, they're refugees, and they get different protections than if they were just, undocumented people crossing the border.
That's right.
So I think if the government doesn't follow its own laws, they're going to pay the price.
And there's the crux of it right there, Tom Garrity, the government following its own laws. And the president himself said this is a humanitarian issue, which seems this fits under the idea of humanitarian work, what we're hearing about Artesia right now.
Yeah, it's just a very unfortunate situation all the way around. There was a real opportunity, I think, for the presidential administration to make a point to say, here's how important this issue is. And so far, Department of Homeland Security, that I believe is overseeing this particular issue, that does not say humanitarian issue. So there's clearly a conflict between what the president is saying and what the administration is doing. And it's playing out in the streets, because there are some in Artesia who are protesting on both sides of this particular issue. And the perception that Artesia faces right now is that you have people who are in favor of the immigrants, the refugees, who are coming in from out of Artesia, and you have residents in Artesia who are protesting that they're here.
Right.
And while there are a lot of humanitarian issues in New Mexico, addressing the needs of those who are in that center behind those walls is paramount. But the city of Artesia at least has the perception that they don't want to be seen as a community that wants to help this these people.
And there's a friction point there.
Yeah, it really is.
I'm going to assume you've tried to make your own access down there and not had much luck. You're going to get in there eventually at some point, Russell Contreras. You did a big piece on this just a few days ago as well. What's the overall sense of it as you've reported it about where this could possibly head now if the suit is out there?
Well, the immigration activists believe that this suit, they want to see this as some sort of precedented trend and get to the larger discussion about how we detain these immigrants and what the process is to get them some sort of legal status. The thing about Artesia, what has been cited and what we reported, is that the national average for this general fear that immigrants can claim is about 63%.
Okay.
It's half that in Artesia. So what that tells us is that either the cases are not as extreme, or they're not getting the opportunity to argue that they're facing, that they are facing this general fear. And what lawyers have been just screaming through the roof for a number of weeks is that we can't even get to make that case. The conditions for which we can make that case have been adversarial, whether it's the chicken pox, quarantine, or it's just the access to lawyers. And what they said in the lawsuit that I thought was interesting was that they're having a detention hearing with a judge in Arlington, Virginia, with kids right beside them, where the mom has to recount the stories of horrific episodes.
He's Skyping in or something.
Exactly, closed circuit. And of course the women have to talk about rape and violence. So, I mean, is this a process? And I think the Obama administration is facing a lot of heat because of this. And the problem is that when we want to discuss the debate around immigration, both sides aren't talking to me. They're talking to their constituents through me. So we can't really get a full picture, and we're not allowed access. My colleague Juan Carlos Lorca in El Paso has toured the facility, but before they brought immigrants in. And we haven't been while they were there.
Right, interesting. One of the other issues was a law library on hand. What does that actually, when I hear that term, am I fooled here? Should be expecting walls of books and things, or what does that actually mean?
So access to information about the law is something that is, for instance, present in our prisons. Prisoners are able to go and research the law in their own cases and do things like that. When you're an attorney, an issue may come up that your client brings up that you need to research in order to best understand what questions to ask next, what to do with that information. The flip of that is for people who are not able to get to an attorney, the ability to look up the law is so fundamental. You know, I don't even know what my defenses might be. I don't even know necessarily why I'm being held, what I'm being held for. Access to that information is huge.
Plus 200 miles away, Inez. 200 miles from a major city. And you've got to think there's got to be, what Russell's pointing out with the percentages, I can imagine how many folks have been just washed right through without even close to a chance for any kind of attorney-client hearing. It just seems vastly unfair at some level.
Well, it sounds as though the point of that center is to process people and send them back, not to look at their cases individually and see whether they have a case.
Now let me stop you there. Didn't a representative from the federal government say, in fact, that's exactly what they were going to do? We'll send you home. That was the quote out of Washington. Secretary of Homeland Security, right, exactly right. So should we be surprised that this tack is being taken?
I'm surprised. I'm always surprised. I don't know why, because it happens over and over again, but I'm always surprised when the government doesn't follow the laws that are passed.
Yeah.
And children who are afraid of death squads and gangs and all the kinds of things that the people in Central America are afraid of have a right to refugee status. And they have to be treated differently than other immigrants, and that's not happening.
Interesting. One of the things I saw Tom Garrity from a volunteer group out of Portland, Oregon, a woman mentioned that she felt these children should be bonded out immediately so they could be dealt with. And following our letter of the law here, what do you guys make of? I'll start with Tom. What do you make of that? That kind of struck me when I heard that.
Well, yeah, and that's obviously it's a legal procedure. And, you know, I think what it underscores is that there's just there's little communication, little transparency. And as a result, that news bottle, instead of being filled with fact, you have it filled with speculation and accusation. So if the administration were to do something to kind of fill that news bottle with fact, and I would start to get information out there, start providing limited tours, and really define what the situation is and why the secrecy.
Right, exactly right. Let me go back to you, Sophie, on that bonding out issue.
So I think one of the problems with bonding people out, which from my perspective is not a problem, is that they would then have fuller access to legal representation. That's likely to mean that they get a more complete hearing, which takes a little bit more time. So to Inez's point, if the purpose here is to process people is such a horrible phrase, isn't it? If the purpose is to process people, bonding these children out, giving them access to their full legal opportunity runs counter to that.
Sure.
So yes, I'd
And
like
where,
to see
and where
them
would they
out.
go once they were bonded out? See, it's a dilemma being 200 miles
if
from
they don't
anywhere,
have don't have a mother, they qualify for the Foster Care Under Refugee Act. And so we don't have that program in New Mexico, but they do have it in Massachusetts. They do have it in Arizona. So then you have actually right now families that are being trained to be foster parents because of this, and people like the Lutheran Services have been training
And the
parents,
Catholic Church
and the
as well,
Catholic Church,
yeah.
and the Catholic Church have been training folks for months in anticipation of this before it was in the news. So they are ready to adopt or foster these children.
Interesting. I'm going to hold that there. That's interesting. Up next, I talk with the comedic duo that launched right here in Albuquerque, the Pajama Men.